They called me a barren housewife. They had no idea I was about to give birth to their ruin. My mother-in-law's favorite word is legacy. She speaks it like a prayer, her voice dropping into a reverent hush as if the word itself were made of gold. The Sterling legacy. The Sterling Empire. The Sterling name etched onto buildings across the city. What she never understood is that every legacy has a ledger, a balance sheet, and hidden liabilities. For 10 years, I was the only one who knew how to read it. And for 10 years, I was the only one they never asked. When I married David, I married the family. Sterling Properties isn't a business. It's a dynasty. And in a dynasty, you have your role. David was the crown prince. Robert was the king. And Karen, my mother-in-law, was the queen regent, the true power behind the throne. I was the vessel. The incubator for the next generation. The pretty, quiet woman who would produce the all-important male heir to one day inherit the kingdom. I wasn't always quiet. In my previous life, my life before Sterling, I was a forensic accountant. I hunted for ghosts in the numbers. I could find a single misplaced decimal point in a billion-dollar merger and follow its trail back to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. I could make spreadsheets sing the confessions their creators tried to bury. I was good at it. I was sharp. I loved the clean, cold certainty of it. Numbers don't lie. You just have to know what questions to ask them. When I first joined the family, I tried to ask questions. I would sit in on the quarterly business meetings, a courtesy extended to me as David's wife. I wasn't expected to speak, of course. My role was to sit there and look supportive, an elegant piece of collateral. But I couldn't help it. I would listen to their projections, their talk of acquisitions and leveraged assets, and I would see gaps. Risks they were willfully ignoring. I remember one meeting, about 8 years ago. They were planning to acquire a massive portfolio of commercial properties in a developing district. The numbers looked good on the surface. Aggressive, but good. Robert was booming about expansion, about planting the Sterling flag on new territory. David was nodding along, his face a perfect mirror of his father's ambition. I saw something else. I saw that their entire risk assessment was based on a single, volatile variable, a pending city rezoning ordinance that was far from a sure thing. If it failed, the debt they were taking on would be catastrophic. I waited for a pause, a small opening, and I took it. Robert, I said, my voice sounding thin in the oak-paneled room. Have we stress-tested these projections against a negative zoning outcome? The political winds are shifting. A 20% buffer for loan servicing might not be enough if the city council stalls. Silence. Not a hostile silence. Worse. A deeply patronizing one. Robert Sterling tilted his head, a slow, indulgent smile spreading across his face. He looked at David, then back at me. Jessica, dear, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You don't need to worry your pretty little head about these things. We have the best men in the city handling it. The best men. David just gave me a little, what can you do? Shrug from across the table. Later that night, he'd put his arm around me and say, I love how smart you are, Jess. But you have to understand, Dad's old school. Let the men handle the business. Your project is us. Our family. My project. After that, I stopped speaking in meetings. I learned my place. I would sit, I would smile, and I would listen to them navigate their empire straight towards an iceberg, all while congratulating each other on their genius. My intelligence wasn't a resource to them. It was a quaint parlor trick. Something they could mention at cocktail parties. David's wife used to be some kind of numbers whiz, you know. It was always in the past tense. Used to be. Because in their world, my identity had been fully subsumed. I was no longer Jessica, the forensic accountant. I was Mrs. David Sterling, future mother of the heir apparent, and for years, I failed at my one and only key performance indicator. We tried. Of course, we tried. We saw doctors. We endured the cold, clinical processes of fertility treatments. The endless tests, the injections, the precisely timed schedules that drain every ounce of romance from a marriage and replace it with a desperate, grinding sense of obligation. Each month was a new cycle of hope and failure. With every negative test, I could feel Karen's gaze get a little colder, her patience wearing a little thinner. She never said anything directly, not at first. It was all insinuation. A sigh at a family gathering when a cousin announced a pregnancy. A thoughtful gift of a book on adoption. Pointed questions about my health, my diet, my stress levels, all framed as concern but delivered as accusation. I was the weak link in the dynastic chain. The faulty equipment. It didn't matter that the doctors had said it was a mutual issue, a simple case of bad biological luck for us both. In the Sterling family narrative, the man is never the problem. The fault always lies with the vessel. My life shrank. My world, which once consisted of complex financial models and thrilling corporate hunts, was now reduced to ovulation charts and temperature readings. I gave up my career to support David's. I managed our homes. I planned the parties. I cultivated the right friends. I did everything a good Sterling wife was supposed to do. I made David's life seamless so he could focus on the important work. And all they saw was my empty womb. My failure. My one job, and I couldn't do it. The pressure built, a slow, crushing weight. I felt myself disappearing. The sharp edges of my personality were worn smooth by the constant, unspoken demand to be softer, quieter, less myself. To just smile and wait. And hope, which brings me to the dinner. It was a Tuesday. We were celebrating the closing of some deal, it doesn't matter which one. They all blur together. The restaurant was the kind Karen loved, absurdly expensive, suffocatingly formal, a place to be seen. The conversation, as always, orbited around the business. Robert was holding forth on a new zoning variance they'd pushed through City Hall. I was pushing a piece of sea base around my plate. Feeling the familiar burn in my stomach I'd been trying to ignore for months. Then Robert, flushed with wine and self-congratulation, turned to David. "Son," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Another win for the books. Soon your boy will be sitting here with us, learning the ropes." It was an old, familiar refrain. But tonight, it landed differently. David gave a tight, uncomfortable smile and glanced at me. "One day, Dad." Karen, who had been watching me with the predatory stillness of a hawk, chose her moment. She dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, her diamond rings catching the light. "Well," she said, her voice clear and cutting, slicing through the restaurant's low hum. "Some of us are starting to wonder if that day will ever come. It's a shame. A man builds an empire, and for what? To have it all managed by strangers because his son married a barren housewife." Barren housewife, she said it so simply. So conversationally. As if she were commenting on the weather. She didn't shout it. She didn't whisper it. She delivered it like a final, unassailable judgment. The culmination of a decade of my life, summarized in 2 devastating words: the world stopped. I saw David's face flush with a weak, pathetic shame. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He did nothing. He said nothing. Robert just took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes tacitly agreeing with his wife. They were a united front. A fortress. And I was outside the walls. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. No, that's not right. It didn't break. It clarified. It became diamond hard. The hurt was there, of course, a white-hot flash of it. But beneath the hurt was a profound, chilling calm. The kind of calm that comes with absolute certainty. The fog of hope I had been living in for 10 years, the hope that they would one day see me, that they would value me, that they would love me, it all burned away. And I saw them for what they were. They weren't family, they were a board of directors. And I was a failed asset being marked for liquidation. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at Karen, held her gaze, and I felt nothing but a strange, cold pity. "You have no idea what you've just done," I thought. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed." I placed my napkin on the table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice even. "I don't feel well." And I walked out. David followed me, of course, hissing apologies and excuses all the way to the car. "She didn't mean it, Jess. She's just stressed. You know how she gets." I just stared out the window. I didn't hear him. I was already somewhere else. I was in a place of numbers and logic. A place of assets and liabilities. The burning in my stomach was almost unbearable now. A fire had been lit. The next morning, I got the call. It was my doctor. I was expecting the results of some routine blood work. Instead, his voice was grave. The endoscopy had shown it clearly. I had a bleeding ulcer. "A bad one, Jessica," he said, and the clinical concern in his voice was more alarming than anything. "Your stress levels are not just high. They're corrosive. You are in a state of chronic, sustained anxiety that is physically eating you alive from the inside out." If you don't make a radical change to the source of this stress, you are heading towards a catastrophic health crisis. I hung up the phone. A catastrophic health crisis. This family was literally killing me. My body was keeping score. My own biology was screaming at me to get out, to fight back, to save myself. Karen's words had been the verdict. This was the sentence, and that was it. That was the moment the project began, not the project David talked about, the project of US. A new project. My project. I was a forensic accountant again. And Sterling Properties was my new case. Karen was right about one thing. I was a housewife. I had been for 10 years, she just didn't realize what a housewife, this housewife, does all day. She manages the books. She knows where every dollar goes. She knows all the passwords. She hears the hushed phone calls David thinks she's ignoring. She sees the odd file he brings home and leaves on his desk. They thought I was an empty vessel. A decorative piece of their legacy. They dismissed me. They humiliated me. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. And now, it was time to balance the ledger. It was time to calculate the debt they owed me. And I decided, in that clean, cold moment, that they would repay it. With interest, a person can be two things at once. For a decade, I was the wife and the accountant, living in the same body. They saw only the wife. Now, it was time to let the accountant get to work. They called me a barren housewife. For 10 years, they saw me as a failed investment, a vessel whose only purpose was to extend their precious legacy. They thought my intelligence was a party trick and my life was their project. But a doctor's call, a warning that their world was physically destroying me, reminded me of who I used to be. The ledgers of the Sterling family had been close to me as a wife, but as a forensic accountant, I was about to conduct the audit of a lifetime. The first night after the diagnosis, I didn't sleep. The pain in my stomach was a dull, hot coal, a constant reminder of the stakes. David slept soundly beside me, his breathing even, untroubled. He had no idea he was sleeping next to a ghost. The ghost of the woman I used to be, now reawakened and hungry. My first move wasn't dramatic. Revenge, real revenge, doesn't start with an explosion. It starts with a whisper. It starts with a single, quiet question. My war room was my dressing room, a space so feminine and frivolous they would never suspect it could be a command center. I bought a new laptop, a burner, paid for in cash. I set up a series of VPNs, tunneling my digital footprint through servers in Estonia, Singapore, and Brazil. I became a phantom on my own home network. Where to begin? In any complex system, you look for the anomaly. The number that doesn't quite fit. The routine expenditure that has no logical purpose. I didn't have access to the company's main servers, not yet. But I had 10 years of living with David. 10 years of him leaving his briefcase in the study, of files left open on his desk, of mumbled conference calls he thought I wasn't listening to. I had a decade of passive data collection. I remembered something from years ago. Back when I was still trying to be helpful. I was helping David organize his quarterly expense reports, a task he found tedious. I saw a recurring payment, the same amount every month, $50,000. It was wired to a holding company I'd never heard of, Trident Advisory Group. The description was always the same, strategic consulting. When I asked him about it, he'd snatched the file from me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. It's just business, Jess. Dad's been paying them for years. Some kind of old handshake deal. He said it with a finality that discouraged further questions. I was the wife. I was not to question the handshake deals of men, Trident Advisory Group. That was my loose thread. I started pulling. On the surface, it was a ghost. A shell corporation, as I suspected. Delaware is where companies go to disappear. But disappearing leaves a trail. I used my old credentials to access a private investigator's database I still paid for out of habit, a professional ghost of my own. I searched for Trident's incorporation papers. The name on the documents was a lawyer who specialized in creating anonymous LLCs. A dead end, but he had to file the paperwork somewhere. And he had to get paid. I went back through our personal finances, scanning years of joint bank statements. I wasn't looking for the $50,000 payments from the company. I was looking for something smaller. Something personal. A link. I found it on a credit card statement from 4 years ago. A charge for $2,000 at a high-end steakhouse downtown. David had taken his father out for his birthday. On the same statement, on the same night, was another charge from the same restaurant for $800. I remember asking David about it. He'd brushed it off. Must have been a mistake, I'll get it refunded. He never did. Curiosity is a powerful acid. It burns through lies. I cross-referenced the restaurant charge with David's calendar from that day. Robert's birthday dinner was at 8 p.m. But David had another entry, earlier that day at 5 p.m. A meeting. The calendar invite was from a man named Marcus Thorne. The subject line was blank, Marcus Thorne. The name was unfamiliar. I ran it through my database. And there it was. The world shifted on its axis. Marcus Thorne was a recently retired city planning commissioner. He had served for 25 years. And during his tenure, every single Sterling property zoning application, every variance request, every permit dispute, was approved. Unanimously. Without delay. A statistical impossibility in the bureaucratic nightmare of city government, and when I cross-referenced Marcus Thorne's publicly listed home address? It was owned by a blind trust. A trust administered by the same Delaware law firm that had incorporated Trident Advisory Group. It was bribery. Clean, simple, and grotesquely effective. $50,000 a month, every month, for over 20 years. $1 million handshake deal. It was the grease that kept the Sterling empire moving. Robert wasn't a brilliant negotiator. He was just a common crook with a big checkbook. The legacy my mother-in-law was so proud of, the one she sacrificed my identity for, was built on a foundation of systematic, felonious corruption. I felt a dizzying, exhilarating rush. It was the old feeling. The hunt. The click of puzzle pieces falling into place. The pure, clean logic of it all. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't a wife or a vessel. I was myself. The ulcer still burned in my stomach, but now it felt different. It wasn't the fire of anxiety. It was a furnace. It was fuel, but this was just the beginning. Bribery was a symptom. I wanted the disease. I needed to know how deep the rot went. I needed to get onto the main servers. That meant I needed David's corporate login credentials. Not just his password, but the physical security key he kept on his keychain. Getting it required a level of domestic espionage I never thought I'd be capable of. For a week, I was the perfect wife. I made him his favorite meals. I asked about his day with a renewed, convincing interest. I initiated intimacy. I made him feel like the king of his castle. I was playing a role, and the performance of my life depended on it. The opportunity came on a Thursday night. He came home late, exhausted and a little drunk from a networking event. He dropped his keys on the hall table, stumbled upstairs, and passed out. The house was silent. My heart was a trip hammer in my chest. This was it. I took the keys to my dressing room. I had everything prepared. A small, high-speed cloning device I'd ordered online. The process took 90 seconds. 90 of the longest seconds of my life. Every creak of the old house was David, coming down the stairs to find me. Every passing car was the sound of my world-ending clone complete. I wiped the key clean of fingerprints, crept back to the hall, and placed the keychain exactly where he had left it. He would never know. I went back to my command center, plugged in the cloned key, and entered his password. I'd known his password for years. It was our anniversary. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Access granted, *. It was like opening a pharaoh's tomb. Decades of data, sealed away. Financial records, internal memos, private emails. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I lived on black coffee and the fire in my gut. I started where it all began, in the archives. I was looking for the seed. The origin of the Sterling Empire. And I found it. It wasn't a zoning variance. It wasn't a shrewd investment. It was a fire. A warehouse fire in 1988. The property was an old textile mill Robert and Karen had inherited, their only significant asset. It was underinsured and failing. According to the official report, the fire was a tragic accident caused by faulty wiring. They received a massive insurance payout. Not just for the property, but for the high-value inventory supposedly inside. That payout was the seed money for their first major real estate purchase. It was the bedrock of their legacy, but I found the original inventory manifests. And then I found the shipping receipts. The warehouse wasn't full of high-value textiles. It was empty. They had shipped everything out a week before the fire. Then I found an internal memo, a single line from Robert to his insurance broker, dated the day after the blaze. Let's hope the inspectors aren't too thorough. And finally, the smoking gun. A scanned personal check. A payment of $20,000 to a man who, after a quick search, I discovered was the fire inspector on the case. The one who ruled it an accident. It was all there. Insurance fraud. Arson. Bribery. That was the sterling legacy. It wasn't built. It was stolen. From that single rotten seed, a whole forest of corruption had grown. The Trident payments were just one branch. I found dozens of other shell companies. Money laundering schemes that washed cash through construction contracts. Embezzlement from pension funds. Tax evasion on a scale that was almost artistic in its complexity. The Sterling family empire wasn't a house of cards. A house of cards is fragile. This was a fortress, built brick by brick with criminality, mortared with lies. And I had the blueprints. I had the schematics for its demolition. I spent the next 6 months in a state of hypervigilance. My life was a meticulously maintained duality. By day, I was the quiet, melancholic housewife. I went to luncheons. I oversaw the landscapers. I played the part of a woman slowly fading away. At night, I was an avenging angel of accounting. I downloaded everything. Every file, every email, every ledger. I created an unbreachable digital archive, a holy testament to their sins, with multiple redundancies stored in offshore servers. I recorded phone calls. I took pictures of documents. I built my arsenal. The stress was immense. The mask I wore every day grew heavier. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I was becoming a ghost in my own life. And David noticed. He didn't notice the truth, of course. His imagination was far too limited for that. He noticed the distance. The way I flinched when he touched me. The way I locked my computer screen whenever he walked into a room. His ego, as fragile and vast as any Sterling man's, could only lead him to one conclusion. He confronted me one Sunday afternoon. I was in my dressing room, reviewing a particularly damning set of wire transfers. He didn't knock. He just walked in, his face a mask of wounded pride. "Who is he, Jess?" he asked, his voice quiet. I looked up, feigning confusion. "Who is who?" "Don't play dumb with me," he snapped, his voice rising. "The late nights. The secrets. You're having an affair, aren't you? After everything we've been through. Is that it? You couldn't give me a son, so you found someone else?" There it was again. My failure. My barrenness. The root of all problems. It was so predictable, so perfectly in character, I almost laughed. The thought that I could have a mind, a purpose, a project of my own that didn't involve another man was so alien to him, it simply didn't compute, and in that moment, I decided to give him a test. A final exam. A part of me, a small, stupid, sentimental part, still held out a microscopic sliver of hope that he was different from them. That he was just a weak man caught in their orbit, not a true believer. I needed to know. I needed to extinguish that last flicker of doubt before I burned his entire world to the ground. I stood up and put a hand on his arm, my face a carefully constructed mask of fear and desperation. "David, no. It's not that. It's something. Something I found. Something about the company. I'm scared." His suspicion instantly morphed into concern, but not for me. For the business. "What are you talking about?" I lowered my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I fed him a single, digestible piece of the truth. "It's about the city zoning board," I said, letting my voice tremble. "A man named Marcus Thorne. I think your father has been paying him. For years. David, it's bribery. It's a felony. If anyone finds out, we could lose everything." I watched his face. I watched him process the information. This was the moment of truth. Would he be disgusted? Would he be shocked that his father was a criminal? Would he say, "We have to go to the police, we have to fix this"? No. He did none of those things. His face went pale. He looked at the door, as if the FBI were about to break it down. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip tight. "Who have you told?" he hissed, his eyes wide with terror. "Have you told anyone? Jessica, you cannot say a word about this to anyone, do you understand me?" "But it's illegal," I said, playing the naive wife one last time. "It's business." He shot back, his voice a frantic whisper. "It's how things get done. It's what my father did to build this life for us. For you. You have to delete whatever you found. We have to bury this. We have to protect the family. Do you understand?" Bury it. He wasn't protecting me. He wasn't even protecting his father. He was protecting the money. The legacy. The empire of dirt it was all built on. He wasn't a victim of his family. He was a co-conspirator. The crown prince was waiting for his throne, and he didn't care how many laws had to be broken to keep it safe. That was the moment he signed his own death warrant. The last ember of affection I had for the man I married turned to ash. There was no more guilt. No more hesitation. No more thus. There was only the objective. The plan. I looked up at him, tears welling in my eyes. The best performance of my life. Okay, I whispered. Okay, David. I'll bury it. For us. He hugged me, relief flooding his face. Thank you, he said, stroking my hair. Thank you. I knew you understood. He didn't understand a thing. I wasn't burying the evidence. I was just digging the grave a little deeper. And I was going to bury him, and his father, and his mother, right inside it. He thought my secret was a man. He thought my greatest betrayal would be in the bedroom. He never once considered that my real secret was a ledger, and that my greatest betrayal would be in the boardroom. ***. My revenge began not with a bang, but with a question about a single line item in an expense report. That one loose thread led me to a truth buried for 30 years. The Sterling Empire wasn't built. It was forged in corruption, arson, and fraud. For 6 months. I lived a double life, the grieving wife by day, a digital ghost by night, collecting the evidence I needed to destroy them. When my husband, David, confronted me, suspecting an affair, I gave him a final test. I revealed a piece of his family's criminality, hoping to see a flicker of morality in him. Instead, I saw only fear and a desperate greed to protect the family's dirty money. That was the moment he ceased to be my husband and became just another target on the ledger. ***. He thought my secret was a man. He thought my greatest betrayal would be in the bedroom. He never once considered that my real secret was a ledger, and that my greatest betrayal would be in the boardroom. David's panicked confirmation didn't accelerate my plan, but it did simplify it. It cauterized the last remnants of sentimentality. The objective was now pure, clean, and unburdened by emotion. This was no longer about a broken heart or a wounded ego. This was a hostile takeover of their reality. The first step in any demolition is to place the charges. My arsenal of data was the explosive, but I needed a detonator. More than that, I wanted to profit from the collapse. It was the one piece of poetic justice I would allow myself. They saw me as a financial drain, a housewife living off their largesse. It was only fitting that I should become the sole beneficiary of their ruin. This is where the plan moved from the digital world into the physical. I needed a proxy, a third party who could act on my behalf without ever being traced back to me. Using my personal savings, the money I had from my career before I married David. The money they always condescendingly referred to as my little nest egg. I hired a discreet financial forensics firm in Switzerland. Everything was handled through encrypted channels. They never saw my face. I was just a voice, a client with a very specific, very unusual request. My instructions were simple. I provided them with a sliver of the evidence I'd found, just enough to prove the legitimacy of the impending cataclysm without revealing the whole picture. I directed them to use my funds to execute the largest possible short position against Sterling Properties. For those of you who don't speak the language of Wall Street, shorting a stock is making a bet that it will fail. You borrow shares, sell them at their current high price, and then, when the price collapses, you buy them back for pennies on the dollar to return them, pocketing the difference. It's a vulture's game. A way to get rich off of ruin. It was, in short, the most fitting weapon I could possibly choose. The Swiss firm executed the trade through a labyrinth of shell corporations, a mirror image of the Sterling's own business practices. The bet was placed. The trap was set. All that was left was to spring it. The 6 months I spent gathering the data were tense. The next 2 months, while the short was being positioned, were almost unbearable. I was a sleeper agent in my own home, living with the enemy, every day a performance. David, believing he had dodged a bullet, became cloyingly attentive. He thought he had brought his straying wife back into the fold. He would bring me flowers, suggest weekend trips. He thought we were fixing our marriage. I was merely running out the clock on his life. Karen, for her part, seemed to have forgotten the dinner entirely. To her, it was an insignificant comment, a momentary lapse of decorum. She went back to treating me with her usual cool dismissal. She would ask about my hobbies, if I was keeping busy. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was almost impressive. They moved through the world wrapped in a cocoon of absolute certainty, convinced of their own untouchability. They never once looked down to see the ground crumbling beneath their feet. I chose the date for the demolition with care. It was the day of the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, the family's biggest charity event. It was the pinnacle of their social calendar, the night where Karen reigned supreme, showcasing her philanthropy and her family's unimpeachable public image. It was their coronation. It felt right that it should also be their execution. That morning, with David, Karen, and Robert all busy with preparations for their big night, I initiated the final sequence. My arsenal was divided into 2 packages. The first was for the press. I had researched financial journalists for months, looking for the perfect one, not a seasoned veteran who might be too cozy with the corporate world, but a young, hungry reporter with a small online publication and a reputation for being a bulldog. Someone who would see this not just as a story, but as the story that would make their career. I sent the first package from a public library computer, routing it through the Tor network to make it completely anonymous. It was a curated selection of the most explosive, most easily verifiable evidence: the 1988 fire inspector's cancelled check, the wire transfer records to Marcus Thorne's shell company, and a handful of the most damning internal emails from Robert, written with the casual criminality of a man who never dreamed anyone would be reading them. I attached a short, anonymous note: Sterling Properties is a 3-decade-long criminal enterprise. Here's the proof. Verify it. The rest of the story is coming. The second package was for the government. Using the same anonymous protocols, I uploaded the entire, unredacted archive of everything I had found to the SEC's official whistleblower portal. Every fraudulent ledger, every laundered dollar, every illegal transaction. It was a data bomb, containing enough evidence to launch a dozen investigations and send the entire Sterling executive team to prison for the rest of their lives. I hit send. There was no confirmation screen. The files just vanished into the ether. It was done. That evening, I got ready for the gala. I put on a black dress, something elegant and simple. Morning attire. David came into the dressing room, adjusting his bow tie. He smiled at my reflection in the mirror. "You look beautiful, Jess," he said. "Tonight's a big night. Dad's going to announce the new hospital wing we're funding. The Sterling name, immortalized on yet another building." The irony was exquisite. "I'm sure it will be a wonderful evening," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of a supportive wife. The drive to the hotel was surreal. David chattered on about business, about the market, about his father's legacy. He was a dead man walking, and he was planning his itinerary for the next decade. I just stared out the window at the city lights, the city they thought they owned. I felt a profound, unnerving calm. The fire in my stomach was gone. For the first time in years, there was no pain. There was just stillness. At the gala, I played my part. I smiled. I shook hands. I listened to the sycophantic praise being heaped upon my father-in-law. I watched Karen glide through the room, the queen of her gilded, temporary kingdom. About an hour into the event, I saw the first ripple. A junior executive whispering urgently to the company's lawyer. The lawyer's face went pale as he looked at his phone. He quickly made his way over to Robert, then a second phone buzzed. And a third. A low murmur began to spread through the ballroom. The young journalist had just published his article. The headline was a cannonball: Sterling Properties, an empire built on fraud? Leaked documents allege decades of corruption. It was like a contagion. Within minutes, every phone in the room was lit up. The polite chatter died, replaced by frantic, hushed whispers. People weren't looking at the stage anymore. They were looking at the Sterlings. Not with admiration now, but with a new, horrified curiosity. Robert was surrounded by his inner circle, his face a purple mask of fury and confusion. David was frantically trying to get him off the floor, to get him somewhere private. He caught my eye from across the room. His look wasn't one of accusation. It was pure, desperate pleading. "Help me. Fix this." He still saw me as his helpmate, the woman who would manage the crisis. He still didn't understand that I was the crisis, but it was Karen's face I will never forget. She was standing alone near the stage, her benevolent smile frozen, cracking at the edges. She was looking at her guests, at the pillars of the community, and seeing them shrink away from her. The sterling name, which had been her shield and her crown, was becoming a mark of shame in real time. Her legacy was turning to poison in front of her eyes. She looked utterly, completely lost. The matriarch, stripped of her empire, was just an old woman in an expensive dress. I didn't stay for the finale. I didn't need to. I slipped out a side door, unnoticed in the chaos. I walked the 20 blocks home, the cool night air feeling clean on my skin. I didn't take a cab. I wanted to feel the pavement under my feet. I wanted to feel the city that they would no longer own. That was 3 hours ago. The financial markets will open in Asia in about an hour. When they do, the sterling property stock, buoyed for years by lies and corruption, will face the one thing it cannot survive, the truth. It will collapse. Not by a little. It will be a wipeout. A black swan event, they'll call it. My short position will trigger. The money I spend on the Swiss firm will feel like a rounding error compared to the profit I will make from their downfall. They took my career, my identity, my health. I'm taking their fortune. It feels like a fair trade. The ledger, after all this time, will finally be balanced. The SEC will freeze their assets by morning. The indictments will follow. The trials will be long and public and humiliating. The sterling name will be dragged through the mud for years, a permanent synonym for corporate greed and scandal. They wanted an heir to inherit their kingdom. Instead, their legacy will be a cautionary tale told in business schools, a footnote in the annals of white-collar crime. So, the question everyone asks in stories like this is, was it worth it? Did revenge bring me peace? It's a simple question with a complicated answer. I don't feel joy. I don't feel triumphant. I feel empty. But it's a clean, quiet emptiness. It's the emptiness of a house after a fever has broken. The illness is gone. The pain is gone. There is only a profound silence. They created me. The woman I was before, the trusting wife, the hopeful partner, she died on the floor of that restaurant. They killed her. And in her place, they forged a weapon. A weapon that was perfectly designed to find the flaws in their own armor and destroy them from within. I am their greatest creation. They wanted a legacy. I gave them one. My name is Jessica Sterling. And this is the story of how I balanced the books.